Hello there, everyone. This is Anna Hampton here at Depth Theology, and today we're looking at Genesis 1 to understand more about chaos and its connection to cross-cultural risk. What was happening in Genesis 1 through 3? What does it tell us about how God works and his character? I don't know about you, but if you grew up in the church like I did, this story of creation has been told so many times, and usually from a narrow scientific viewpoint. We often don't look at it from the point of what it does tell us about God's character. We never think about how startling God's actions really are. In just the first 3 verses of the Bible, we learn significant aspects of his character that will help when facing all sorts of threats against our lives when we're in frontline gospel-related work. Let's start by reading Genesis 1 through 3. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. God makes a general statement here, and then he goes into specifics. Verse 2. The earth was formless and void, and darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was moving over the surface of the waters. Then God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. Well, if I were the creator of the universe, this is probably not how I would tell it. My version would be much more like telling a story of my display of power and control. There would be evil vanquished after a war, and I would be the heroine rescuing everyone and everything in the nick of time, establishing peace, order, and beauty. That appeals to my vanity, being the Wonder Woman type savior. In fact, that's pretty much what the story of creation was like for the ancient peoples who lived at that time. When Moses was writing down Genesis 1, there were numerous other creation stories circulating. These stories came from peoples like the Sumerians, Babylonians, Egyptians, Ugarites, Hittites, peoples we often describe simply as the ancient Near East, and they lived in the area called Mesopotamia. Scholar Samuel Hook tells us that unlike the Genesis account, there is no conception of creation ex nihilo, which means out of nothing, in any of these ancient Near East stories or myths of creation. In fact, if you study the ancient Near East creation stories, they're pretty much like a Superman story. They share the same characteristics. For all of them, the world began in conflict and chaos, a battlefield of the gods. There's this divine battle between good and evil. The evil force tries to defeat the protector of humans. Good triumphs at great cost. The world is created, but it's a world of struggle and of some triumph. It's the story that's repeated on Sunday morning cartoons, Saturday morning cartoons, in ancient epic poems, and even in the most recent Star Wars movie. In contrast, the Bible begins with Bereshit bara Elohim, in the beginning, God. This first phrase of the Bible fills cross-cultural risk with meaning. God begins history. He is in history. History came through him. History is not a random chain of events. Therefore, what we're experiencing in risk does not take him by surprise. In what may seem like nothing, like an absence of God's presence, God is there. God's presence brings about a different reality at God's initiation. This in the beginning is the foundation of our awareness of God, of the world, and humanity. Now, all ancient cosmogonies except Genesis portray the beginning of creation as warfare. The Genesis account is unique. It stands as an alternative to the competing mythologies of surrounding cultures. God does not create from conflict. He creates from love. There's no battle that he has with evil. There is grace right from the beginning. So this is an important point for us in cross-cultural risk. Which narrative, which story will we choose to listen to? The one that's screaming at us from the news, from the terrace, or is it the one from the Lord who is in control and is there? Let's take a look first at Tohu Bohu, which means formless and void. That's simply how it's translated. But there's a whole lot more beneath that surface, pun intended. We're told something really astonishing here. The world God created was at one time formless and void. Underneath reality is this wonder and surprise of emptiness, of chaos. The Bible uses the word tohu, which means waste, emptiness, broken, the opposite of created, meaninglessness, desolation. In the ancient Near East, this kind of chaos is terrifying, horrifying. In all the early creation accounts and in many religions of the time, chaos is present at the beginning of being and becoming. It is something supremely negative. It's abstract, it's formless, void, darkness, water. These are all horrifying symbols of what we cannot control. It's unimaginable terror that existed before the formation of the earth. It also denotes a condition that is not actually as it is, but how it affects our powers of perception. So it's a condition of utter confusion where we can't tell apart two different objects. They look like they're right next to each other and we can't tell them apart. Now, Bohu is this Hebrew root of it is an expression of pain in Rabbinic Hebrew. It marks the chaotic condition as unbearable pain, full of contradiction and struggle. While Tohu denotes the condition of confusion, Bohu denotes this condition of actual confusion, not what we perceive to be confusion. So this phrase together of Tohu vabohu is a blurred, muddled, unclear, painful, indistinct situation, which is exactly like cross-cultural risk in high-risk areas. This is applicable because we have chaos and confusion, pain and struggle that are constantly looming over us when we're living through that kind of a high-risk, constant threat situation. There's threats upon threats. There's a great uncertainty. We don't know what is real, what's going to really happen, which threats are real, what is gossip or slander. Chaos is fundamental to humanity, whether we're in risk or not. But especially when we're at the level of the threats of death, we need to thoughtfully recognize what's actually happening and what are God's activities at that time. That can be a crucial stabilizing force. When life is not the way we wish it to be, let's not be paralyzed by the illusion of reality created by risk. God's world, the world where He is working, is the real world. The world is not really the way I perceive it to be, but it's the way that God sees it, His perspective. Threats are not reality. These threats often do not materialize in risk, but they are potentially paralyzing. Remember that in God's real world, He overcame that chaos even greater than what we're experiencing in a dangerous risk situation, and He will overcome it again. He offers us the sanctuary of His presence in the middle of that chaos, however deep, however extremely uncertain and precarious it might seem to be to us. While Tohu vabohu is the place and world of death where life is not possible, it is possible to have life in the cross-cultural risk situation. It is possible to maintain personal stability even as you surrender to whatever God has for you in cross-cultural risk. He wants you to speak light into those dark areas to the people living in darkness. We'll continue studying Genesis 1 through 3 next time. And until then, this is Anna Hampton with Depth Theology.